UFC 281 is officially in the rear view, and to be honest, as much as it was a far greater challenge to stay up until 6 AM in comparison to the far more easygoing UFC 280, I must say that Saturday's event was one hell of a show. Not only is it for me a front runner in the event of the year discussions that we'll likely be having in about a month or two, but as far as the actual live viewing experience goes start to finish, that was just about as much fun as I've had watching the UFC in quite some time. So for this video, I'm just going to celebrate the things that made UFC 281 so damn good. Consistency. I'll be getting into the specifics of this fight card more as I go on, but let me just say that UFC 281, despite its 14 fights, didn't really have any dull periods. Indeed, there was a fight or two that wasn't up to the hellacious standard, but the sheer amount of finishes on this card made its momentum a total joy to sit through. Even the few fights that went to the scorecards had something to shout about. The variety of emotions that we felt from start to finish, especially in the event's second half. Yeah, it was just an excellently paced viewing experience. The finishing rate. And the second of the two overarching points I have to make about this card comes in the form of the little slice of history that this event managed to carve out. Not only did it have an incredibly rare 7 first-round finishes across 14 fights, but by the time the event was over, the UFC record for event finishes had been matched with 11. Only UFC 224 Nunes vs Pennington and the Fight Night event that saw Luke Rockhold's first victory over Michael Bisping have the same amount of finishes. No explanation is needed on this one, folks. UFC 281 was just pretty violent. The double knockdown. The first two fights on this card were pretty good, especially that very slick finish for Carlos Ulberg over a very commendable level of opposition. But the first truly wild moment of UFC 281 came when Mike Trizano took on Choi Sung-woo. This was a back and forth barn-burning bar fight of a mixed martial arts contest. These two men seemingly locked down the fight of the night bonus for the event before the card had even really kicked off, and though each guy had huge moments, the biggest moment of the fight probably came early when they managed to score a rare double knockdown. Well, I say score, but they both fell victim to a double knockdown. Maybe that's a better way to put it. This battle was quite hectic from the get-go, and by the time Trizano found the finish, I was actually kind of surprised to see that we were still in the first round. A total banger, and though the fight of the night reward went to Poirier vs Chandler, I'm sure Dana was pretty generous backstage with his bonuses. As one-sided as it gets, I honestly had no idea why the UFC were setting Molly McCann up against Erin Blanchfield. Not only did the 23-year-old Blanchfield read as a terrible matchup for Molly on paper, but even if the idea was to build the young prospect's name off of a somewhat established star, why do it on the prelims? Why put McCann in a position to lose steam when she's very clearly the one on the rise? Blanchfield is so good that she would have likely done the exact same thing or something similar to most fighters within the division's 10 to 15 range in the rankings, and when the cage doors did close, it was totally non-competitive, ugly even. One hell of a performance for Blanchfield, a real coming out moment, but again, the UFC's thought process on this matchmaking remains a little baffling to me, but hey, it certainly was entertaining to watch. A new contender. We've seen Ryan Spann lose enough in the octagon to disregard his title challenges to at least some extent at present, but then again, there was an unmistakable assuredness to the way that he got Dominic Reyes out of there that will make him an interesting addition to the top 10. As far as brutal knockouts go, this might have been the roughest of the night. The initial impact was one thing, but that follow-up shot was just totally devastating. For Dominic Reyes, I don't know what the future is going to hold. On one hand, he is only 32 years old, but in the last 3 fights he has taken on an insane amount of damage. But for Ryan Spann, he certainly has arrived on the 205-pound scene, and I look forward to finding out just how far he can go. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads. A rough end. If UFC events were all feel-good moments, we wouldn't appreciate them when they came around. And I think that I can speak on behalf of all MMA fans when I say that Frankie Edgar's final walk to the octagon bordered on difficult to watch. It's not just that he was clearly being fed to a young rising talent in his retirement fight, which is of course the way of the sport, but for years upon years, Frankie was the guy who just wouldn't go down, spending his prime in 2 divisions as an elite presence, where even if he did come up short, you could always bet on him at the very least to give a good account of himself. But as soon as Brian Ortega became the first man to find his off switch, each Frankie Edgar appearance brought with it a sense of dread. We know how these stories generally play out, but seeing Edgar slowly losing his ability to take a shot was certainly up there with Chuck Liddell in terms of that undeniable sadness factor. Full credit must be given to Chris Guida Gutierrez for going out there and getting the job done. But in reality, coming into a sold-out New York arena, taking on a guy like Frankie, who really does want to be the guy to drive the legendary Frankie Edgar out of the sport. As good as advertised. At the moment, the UFC are doing some great work in matching up these all-action lightweight fighters for mid-main card showdowns that always just seem to hit. The most recent entry into this series before this one was of course the clash between Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, but I would honestly argue that Poirier versus Chandler was even better. It was a more determined performance from both competitors, and though Gaethje versus Chandler was awesome for other reasons, I just felt like front to back I could feel the intensity of it all a lot more. What a fight this was. Again, full credit to Trizano and Choi for blasting the gates open on the prelims, but my god did Poirier and Chandler take that performance money and just run off with it. After 5 fights, Chandler may be posting a losing record in the promotion, but what a signing he has been for this company. That level of aggression and showmanship is almost always matched by his opponents, like they unknowingly sign a contract to fight Chandler and dive headfirst into his kind of matchup, and huge respect must be given to Poirier, who fought through every single storm that was thrown at him before finding himself on the front foot when it mattered most. An easy fight of the year contender for me, even a frontrunner perhaps. I would put it ahead of Gaethje versus Chandler, as well as Burns versus Chimaev. It may only be second to Teixeira versus Prochazka in my book. One hell of a contest. Undisputed. Carla Esparza was given little to no chance at victory by quite a lot of analysts coming into this fight. Faced with the overbearing physicality of the challenger Zhang Weili, Carla's case for victory in most predictions certainly wasn't helped by the manner in which she reclaimed her title against Rose Namajunas, or by the many split and narrow decisions she earned during her win streak to claw her way back into contention. But even with most of us pretty comfortable in predicting a dominant win for Weili, to see her get the submission over someone like Esparza was an extra level of commendable. In reality, while Esparza is a very good fighter, with a credible route to victory against most, Zhang was just a bad matchup for her, and in being the seasoned championship level fighter that she is, Weili made pretty easy work of her. In many ways, it was a victory that served the future at 115 pounds quite well. Weili has a champion's aura about her, and if we do see another fight between her and Thug Rose, you can bet that it will produce fireworks. Stylebender bucks the trend. Before we get to our final entry and obviously talk about Alex Pereira, in this runner-up position, I definitely do want to give props to Adesanya, because when you look at the fights that he had with Jared Cannonier, Marvin Vettori and Yoel Romero, even if they were wins and this most recent one wasn't, Stylebender showed up on Saturday night and decided to take a primarily kickboxing approach against a guy who had the tools to knock him out. Now, whether he did that out of a desire to make a point, or simply because he didn't have the physicality or skills to get the win by other means, the takeaway here was that Izzy was pretty damn entertaining. And up until the fight's momentum turned against him, Adesanya was giving us one hell of a performance. The exchanges these two guys had, the head movement that Izzy was using to very narrowly escape Poatan's massive shots. In the end, of course, it cost him dearly. But I guess it was nice to see Israel Adesanya going out there with a bit of a fire in his belly. Poatan lands. And finally, we come to the obvious one. The primary headlining story to emerge from this event. Alex Pereira defeats Israel Adesanya in the 5th round to take home the middleweight strap. Not only was this a truly massive victory for Pereira in terms of his rivalry with Izzy, or even in terms of his legacy as an MMA fighter and overall combat sports athlete, but when you really break it down past all of that, we just saw another challenger come from behind in a fight that they were losing to steal away a world title in the final round. Only 5 challengers in UFC history have ever defeated an undisputed champion in the 5th round to win the belt. TJ Dillashaw versus Barao, Miesha Tate versus Holly Holm, and then out of nowhere we get 3 in 1 year. Jiri Prochazka, Leon Edwards, and now Alex Pereira. It was a special finish to a great fight and one highly intriguing rivalry. And looking ahead, I think that there's more than enough demand there to justify running this one back in 2023. And that will just about do it for this video. But what, in your opinion, was the standout moment from Saturday night's event as a whole? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this fight card? If you do want to help in supporting the channel, liking the video and subscribing would of course do wonders. Thank you for watching.